Darcy sat at the table in the back room that served as her office at Shaq's. It was where she posted her monthly schedule, did daily, weekly, and monthly accounting and related paperwork, and was also where some of her employees did homework or ate lunch during breaks. Sugar Shuck, or simply Shack as it was known locally, was a favorite coffee shop in Maple Ferry for all coffee lovers. The establishment had a trendy neo-diner style. There were enough tables, bar stools, cozy nooks, and booths for every customer to find a seat. The coffee here was not bottomless, but very tasty, Wi-Fi was free, and the music was always pleasing to the ear. Located in the heart of Maple Ferry's retail area, the cafe attracted many passing customers with its Riverwalk frontage and corner facade at the intersection of Main and Mill Streets. The end of summer made the Shack Cafe a little quieter than usual, as many families were still on summer vacation or hard at work on their farms at the end of the harvest season. For Darcy, the end of August meant one thing. Pumpkin spice season is about to begin. With kids back on campus, the Great Pumpkin has returned to cafes across the country in the form of pumpkin spice lattes. Her baristas hate making these sugary drinks, but the customers, as well as the cash registers, loved them. Darcy pushed aside thoughts of pumpkin spice and focused on putting together her weekly grocery order before calling it a day. If it weren't for the giant staff calendar on the wall staring her in the face, she might not have noticed the date at all. But there it was, printed in large gold font on August 25th, 2024. The 5-year anniversary of the end of her divorce, and also the day she signed the contract to buy the Sugar Shack. She probably should have planned a party, at least to celebrate the anniversary of buying the cafe. In her typical fashion, Darcy didn't even think about it. If you asked anyone in Maple Ferry how they would describe Darcy Monahan, you'd probably hear answers like, no nonsense, straight as an arrow, or pragmatic, but you'd be less likely to hear comments like open, carefree, or fun. At least not now. Darcy grew up in Maple Ferry and was a typical child. A blonde with a permanently braided ponytail, broken knees, climbed trees, rode a pink bicycle with ribbons on the handlebars. Everything is as it should be. She was the third of 4 daughters in the Monahan family, a family that had deep roots in the city and valley. Darcy's childhood was filled with playing with friends and the many cousins who lived nearby. Being a late Gen Y Maple Ferry kid meant what you probably imagine. The children were enrolled in gymnastics, horse riding, kids' league, and soccer, and the parents worked on farms or elsewhere to pay for these activities, and as long as the children returned home before dark, everything was in order. Darcy grew up in a large 2-story house located near the town square, a park built around a small bandstand with a war memorial in one corner and a children's playground in the other. It was the center of all the celebrations that took place in Maple Ferry and the Valley. Memorial Day Parade started and ended in the city square. Summer theater in the park. It took place on the stage in the square. Maple Ferry wasn't a big town, but it was nice and predictable. The Monahans lived in Maple Ferry and farmed in the valley carved by the river that runs through the town for many generations. Several of the names on the war memorial in the square belonged to members of the Darcy family. This put the Monahans on par with the Cooks, Lassells, and Roussos when it came to being immersed in the history of the valley and the city. Members of each of these families have been present at every important historical event that has occurred in or at Maple Ferry since the Revolutionary War. The first teacher of the first one-room school in the valley was Monahan's great-great-great-great-great-grandmother Darcy. The first murder victim in Maple Ferry was Cook, in town by Jean Lassalle, who was hanged by the first sheriff of Maple Ferry, also Monahan, who was Darcy's great-great-great-great-grandfather. Thus, Darcy and her sisters were not just children with a rich heritage in Maple Ferry, they were descendants of the founders. In many other places, the history of her family and the other founders would have led to hostilities and intergenerational conflicts that would define the life of the city, but not in Maple Ferry or in the valley. People in the north were generally practical. When this murderous story happened, the Cook family admitted that Thaddeus Cook deserved a good beating, and did not blame Jean Lassalle for wanting to strangle him. In the West, however, Thaddeus would likely have been challenged to a duel and shot for the same crime. So the fact that Jean went this far, while shocking and deeply saddening, his actions were at least understandable. It was as clear to the Lassalles as it was to the Cooks that Jean had to be punished for the murder of Thaddeus. So when the county court came to town that cold March morning and Jean Lassalle was still in his jail cell, Mammon Lassalle and Sheriff Monahan both knew the city would see the gallows. Over the next century and a half, these families helped the city and valley grow in both population and legend. There were so many Lassalles married to Monahans and Cookies married to Rousseaus and vice versa, that when Darcy finally arrived at Maple Valley High, she had more relatives at school than friends. This made family gatherings truly enormous and the ability to find a romantic partner extremely difficult. But Darcy cared little about that, especially as she neared graduation. When she turned 18 at the start of her senior year, Darcy had white hair, fair skin, and bright blue eyes. With a height of only 5 feet, she, of course, could not aspire to a career as a model, but she had a figure where everything was about her hips, breasts, and butt, like a woman breaking out of the body of a long-time gymnast with a cheerful face. Plus, with her height, strength, and years of gymnastics and dance training, it's no surprise that Darcy was also a cheerleader. She was one of Maple High's flying cheerleaders, which meant she spent as much time in the air as she did on the ground during performances. She was constantly being tossed, supported, or caught before landing painfully, either by muscular cheerleader boys or by hot cheerleader girls. In the team's programs, Darcy was always at the top of the pyramid and performed risky stunts that delighted the audience. Darcy was strong, attractive, came from a local royal family, and was virtually unavailable for relationships at her school. That didn't mean Darcy didn't flirt with guys her own age. She studied those around her and satisfied her needs, but did not date boys. Darcy and her sisters always talked about how their family tree in Maple Ferry and the valley had too few branches, and the last thing Darcy wanted was to fall in love and get married, adding another branch to that shrinking gene pool. Considering how openly Darcy avoided romantic relationships among her immediate and extended family, it was no surprise that when he showed up halfway through her final year of school, Darcy took particular notice of him. You could say his appearance almost threw her off balance. He was Damon Riley, and his family was not from Maple Ferry, nor from the Valley. Damon's family was from Boston, and he had the height, square jaw, broad shoulders, and black hair that suggested his type of Irishman was not from here. Darcy didn't notice him at first, literally. She was in her second advanced English literature class and editing a poem she'd written for Mr. Resch's second semester project when Damon walked into the classroom and spoke quietly to the teacher, then walked past the rows of desks to Darcy's empty desk. Squeezing between the aisles, trying to be as unnoticed as possible by their new classmates, Damon and Darcy were shocked when his bag slid off his shoulder and hit Darcy square in the back of the head, causing her face to hit the table and the poem she had been staring at so intently. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Damon dropped his bag on the empty desk behind Darcy and lowered himself to her desk level to check on her. The noise in the classroom died down to deathly silence with the sharp sound of Darcy's head hitting the table, but when Damon reached out to check on the girl, the silence was replaced by increasing noise. Darcy looked up and her vision began to struggle to get both eyes to focus, and then she looked into the angel's face. Beautiful gray-blue eyes under strong eyebrows. They looked like a cold ocean at the base of the cliffs. Why was she thinking in comparisons? Why was her nose running? Damon immediately yelled for someone to call the school nurse while taking a folded handkerchief from his jacket pocket. Supporting the back of her head with his left hand, Damon gently lifted her head, slightly lifting her nose upward, and pressed the scarf to her face. Darcy looked into Damon's eyes again before taking the handkerchief from him and pressing it to his nose. "Keep the pressure up," Damon said. "Mr. Resch has already called the nurse." That's how they met. She teased him, telling new friends and acquaintances that they only started dating because Damon first tried to kill her. to which Damon always responded that this seemed to be the only tactic that could get her to pay attention to him. In the final days of their breakup, 10 years after they met, neither of these stories seemed particularly funny to them anymore, and both knew that the pain of their first meeting was nothing compared to what they had done to each other over those years that had passed since his bag slipped and they held hands for the first time. Darcy shook her head slightly, stopped looking at the calendar, and focused on finishing the day's paperwork and double-checking the schedule for the evening shift and the next day. Sunday nights at the shack were notoriously quiet, even though the fall semester at the local college had already begun and Maple Valley High School students were still on summer break. For some reason, Sunday evenings were still a time for families in Maple Ferry, so between the calmer flow of clients and the amazing closing team she had assigned, Darcy knew tonight would be a quiet one. As for the staff, Lyric was her best barista and could have closed the cafe on his own, and Chelsea was the kind of hostess and waitress that could have made a career in the service industry with her smile and friendliness alone. They can handle it. Darcy and Damon were practically inseparable for almost 5 years. They started dating as soon as her concussion symptoms subsided, and they were a couple at prom and graduation ceremony. They went to university together, she to get a degree in business and management, he to study biology. They ran into a bit of trouble during their senior year of college when Damon decided to pursue a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree in Canada. Darcy was graduating with top grades and wanted to go straight to work. Moving to Canada meant putting that on hold as she was not allowed to work off campus. Damon was adamant. The school in Guelph, Ontario, was one of the best veterinary schools in the world, and it was very difficult to get into. When Damon's acceptance notice arrived, he wanted to celebrate, but Darcy, although proud of him and happy for his success, felt a slight pang of despair. What will she do for 4 years in Canada? 4 years is an eternity for a woman in a working environment, especially if they were planning on having children. And so it was that after the euphoria of Damon's upcoming graduation and acceptance into veterinary school, they had that conversation. "Darling, what should I do in Canada for 4 years while you study?" Darcy asked. "I'm sure there are many places in Guelph that are looking for a smart young manager to join their teams." Damon suggested. "It appears to have several large food manufacturing facilities, a large brewery and Coca-Cola bottling plant, not to mention the service industry that should support such a large city with a large university." Big. Guelph was really big compared to Maple Ferry and the Valley. This was partly what attracted Darcy. She was also attracted by the proximity to Toronto. Darcy was in Toronto once on a school field trip to see the musical Joseph and the Technicolor coat and liked what she saw of the city. There were also advantages to this move, and she did not miss them. "Yes, but Damon, my visa won't allow me to work off campus. I will have to look for a job at the university, and you know, as do I, that any position with a salary will go to a local." Darcy objected. "I'm sure it won't be that bad." Damon replied flippantly, "You'll impress them. Once these hiring managers get to know you, your energy is enough to have them lining up to hire you. But they'll find out I'm only there for 4 years, and then they'll start looking for a replacement for me. What manager in their right mind would want to hire someone with a built-in timer?" Darcy snapped. "Honey, I think you're missing out of sight of the big picture. Yes, it's 4 years, but at the end of these 4 years, I will be making a lot of money, and you will be in the perfect position to do whatever you want. But Damon, when you graduate as a veterinarian, we'll both be 26 and back in the S with a lot of debt and no income security. Yes, I know what the average annual salary for a veterinarian is in the S. But where does that leave us? We won't be married. We'll both be starting from the bottom in our new jobs." "We won't be married?" Damon asked. "Do you know something that I don't?" She grinned. "Perhaps," Damon said, casually taking a small black box from his hoodie pocket and getting down on one knee in front of Darcy. Darcy froze. She covered her mouth with both hands as surprise overtook her basic motor functions. The eyes opened, the nostrils flared, the feet stomped as if they were trying to escape from their place on the sofa. "What did you do, Damon?" she asked from behind her hands. Damon placed his left hand on the floor in a loose fist and reached his right hand over his bent knee and placed a small black velvet box on his open palm. Raising his left hand, he opened the top of the box, revealing a single sparkling diamond on a white gold ring. "Darcy Cara Monahan, will you marry me?" Darcy extended her trembling right hand and took the box. Her thoughts were racing. A few seconds ago, she and Damon were arguing about moving to Canada and what that meant, and now here he was proposing to her. She had imagined this moment 100 times over the past 5 years. Of course, she was going to marry Damon. She knew it down to her bones that they were meant for each other, but she always thought that they would discuss it first, and that he would propose in some grand romantic gesture, not in the middle of an argument. "Oh my God, Damon!" She could only half scream, half squeak. "Yes, yes, of course, I will marry you." They both stood facing each other. Darcy placed the ring on her left ring finger and looked at it before jumping up and hugging Damon. Damon kissed back and wrapped both arms around Darcy, holding her while she was completely in the air. They both became much happier that night. It took a long time before, looking back on their relationship after it ended, Darcy realized that his proposal was tactical. Was she glad he proposed? Did she love being married? In the first 4 years? Yes. In the last 6 months, not particularly. But the fact that he changed the direction of their conversation from "What will Darcy do in Canada?" to "Will you marry me?" had far-reaching and insidious consequences. Darcy looked at her left ring finger, now empty, without even the slightest trace of the ring she had worn for over 5 years. Darcy began putting her laptop and documents into her briefcase. These memories were not particularly painful for Darcy. She and Damon had always gotten along physically. Even when things went wrong in the last year of their marriage, they were always able to satisfy each other and feel connected again for a while, but only for a short time. One day, after a particularly annoying session of mandatory couples therapy, they had sex in a parking lot stairwell off Church Street in Maple Ferry. Maybe sex isn't quite the right word. Cold, cold. I'm not cold at all now, huh? Bastard. Darcy approached Damon in the hallway while they were both waiting for the elevator to take them from the therapist's office to the first floor. Damon looked down and agreed. Darcy really didn't look cold. One of the peculiarities of her fair skin was that when her emotions went wild, it became obvious to everyone around her. Her sisters, when they were growing up, coined the term Darcy meter, which described how much Darcy blushed and where, which correlated with her emotions and their intensity. If her cheeks turned red, she was embarrassed. If her cheeks and skin around her eyes turned red, she was tipsy, but tended to become intoxicated. If your neck, behind your ears, cheeks, and starting to turn red, it's better to run. At that moment, waiting for the elevator outside their therapist's office, Damon could tell that she had passed Darcy Con 4 and was approaching the level of critical mass. He was saved by the elevator bell. The doors opened and Damon stepped back inside, holding the door open so Darcy could enter. "To hell with it," she spat. "I'll take the stairs." And she was gone in a swirl of blonde hair and the sound of the stairwell door being pushed as the elevator doors closed, leaving Damon inside. By the time he reached the bottom floor, he saw Darcy briskly crossing Church Street towards the parking lot. Moving faster because he was worried about Darcy getting behind the wheel in this state, Damon broke into a light jog, trying to catch up with her. "Darcy," he called. "Darcy, wait," Damon called again as she opened the parking lot door and began to climb the stairs to the second level. Damon reached the door a few seconds later and turned up the stairs, catching up to her and calling out her name again, "Darcy MPH." The end of her name was cut off as she stepped out from the top step, tripping him up, and hugged him with a kiss. Not knowing what to do next, Damon reached out with both arms to hug Darcy, but also to put a little distance between them. Darcy didn't like it. She abruptly dropped her hands from his face and pushed his hands to the sides. Just as quickly, she had sex with him. She sat down on the step and looked Damon in the eyes again. "For the record, Darcy," Damon began, "I never, not once, thought you were cold. We've never had a problem with this. We've always been good at it. But in other things, I lacked warmth." With that, Damon stepped to the side, then walked up the steps past Darcy and out onto the second level of the parking lot. It was a long time after she heard his car leave the parking lot before she got up to leave. Darcy locked the back room door behind her and headed into the cafe area to tell the team she was leaving before turning and exiting out the back door. Once outside the shack, she waited until the door was closed behind her, then pulled it slightly to make sure the lock was latched and headed to her car. Summer wasn't over yet in Maple Ferry, and considering it was only early evening, it was warm enough outside for Darcy to roll down the windows of her Jeep and turn up the music. Trying to find something to suit her mood in her Spotify playlists, she laughed out loud when she selected Head Like a Hole by 9 Inch Nails. Damon has always hated industrial music. Probably because he knew that if I listened to it, it meant I was angry, Darcy thought with a nostalgic smile on her face. She pulled out of the shack parking lot and turned onto Main Street, then headed right onto School Road. Her walk home from the cafe was only about 12 miles, and it was a route she often took by bicycle. But on Sundays, Darcy attended Mass before going to the cafe, so she drove the car. The dichotomy between morning Mass and Trent Reznor's screams in the afternoon was not lost on Darcy, and her mood continued to improve as she moved further away from the city. On a whim, she pulled sharply into the parking lot of one of the large shopping complexes surrounding the outskirts of Maple Ferry. After driving through the maze of modern suburban parking lots, Darcy stopped in front of one of her favorite meat and wine boutiques that she liked to visit from time to time. This was her special store, one of those places where the word store is spelled with an extra P and E, and it doesn't look trivial. It was the place she came to when she was looking for culinary inspiration or wanted to fill her soul as well as her stomach. Today, this place definitely served a second function. Without a plan, such a store can be dangerous, especially for someone who knows how to cook and has expensive tastes. Walking across the hall with an empty basket was akin to walking into a toy store with a 5-year-old child and an open wallet. Money will definitely be spent. Resigned to this, even before she turned off the sounds of Trent in her Jeep, Darcy jumped down, closed the door of her burgundy car, and pressed the lock button on the key fob before entering the store. By the time she reached the end of the first row of the store, her cart was already starting to fill dangerously. Flatbread, some expensive pâté, roquefort, a strange tapenade, she already had enough food to cook dinner. Returning to the middle of the row, Darcy added 2 large baking potatoes, a package of locally aged and smoked prosciutto, and 2 top of the beef steaks. She had everything else at home. Leaving the store wasn't easy, and she couldn't do it without adding a homemade apple pie and a couple bottles of decent Zinfandel from one of her favorite wineries to her cart. While the bottles of wine could sit in her wine cellar for a little while longer, the apple pie wouldn't last 2 days in her house. Back in the Jeep, she scrolled through playlists on her phone and turned on another, letting Taylor Swift accompany her on the way back to School Road and out of town. School Road. Yes, it was named that way because of the school that sits on it, the same one-room valley school where her 5 times great-great-grandmother taught, and which was her goal. Back in the late 90s, when Darcy was moving from primary to secondary school, the school building was put up for sale. The Maple Ferry Historical Society tried to raise funds to buy and preserve the school as an important part of the valley's history. But they were unable to outbid Darcy's grandfather, and he eventually purchased the property, along with the adjacent forest and a small section of the river, for an amount that now, in 2024, seemed like mere trifles. When grandfather Monahan passed away in 2019 and the property passed on to Darcy, it came at a great time. She had just moved out of the apartment she shared with Damon, had no savings, and was mounting attorney fees due to the divorce. By the time Darcy moved in, The school had been converted into a small two-room cottage, and it was here that she settled down, settled in, and began rebuilding her life after her breakup with Damon. Now, as she pulled into the driveway, she parked the Jeep in front of the porch and steps that had been added to the school building, and grabbing a paper bag of groceries, she walked past the porch swing and entered the house to begin preparing dinner. After taking off her shoes in the hallway, she walked through the living room and placed the shopping bag on the white marble countertop in the kitchen. A one-room school meant basically a one-room cottage, with a small extension at the back adding 2 bedrooms and extending the existing bathroom. The main living space, living room, kitchen, and dining area occupied a large open room, and despite the rural and rustic exterior of the original building, Darcy's cottage had a very modern and well-appointed interior. Finished in mostly white and gray tones, with natural stone and wood, this large living space felt more like a modern loft than a 200-year-old schoolhouse. In typical Monahan style, however, there were references to the building's past life. The school bell still stood on the dome above the porch and could be operated by a rope in the hallway. Above the fireplace hung a picture of the school painted in the 1880s, and on the mantelpiece was a photograph of Darcy's great-great-grandmother, taken the year the school opened. Peeking into the pantry on her way to the kitchen, Darcy pulled a bottle of Pinot Noir from the wine rack, opened it, and poured it into the decanter, deciding to let the wine breathe while she changed. Walking only a few steps from the closet to the hallway to the bedroom, Darcy entered her sanctuary and sighed in relief when her feet touched the fluffy carpet covering the room. Walking over to the large window on the back wall of the room, Darcy closed the interior shutters, blocking the view of her room from the outside. Although she enjoyed looking at the stream and the forest behind the house, she always felt unsafe being inside the house with the lights on. Turning around and standing in front of the antique full-length mirror, Darcy looked at herself carefully. She had not seen the 32-year-old divorced woman. Darcy saw a beautiful, young, confident woman in you. She didn't have a single gray hair, her eyebrows were perfectly plucked, her eyelashes were long, her lips were full, and when she turned and looked over her shoulder, she saw that her butt was still impressive. Unbuckling her belt and undoing the button and zipper of her jeans, Darcy took another look at herself as she pulled her jeans off, giving herself a chance to appreciate her figure as they sank to the floor. Then, straightening up again and placing her hands on her hips, she took a slightly wider stance and began to move through a series of poses from her yoga practice. She was 32, but she was still as flexible and almost as toned as when she was a competitive cheerleader. Her gym membership was not wasted. Resigned to the idea of taking a bubble bath after dinner, Darcy quickly changed into clean underwear, pulled on yoga pants and a flannel button-up shirt, then slipped on her Crocs and returned to the kitchen. Taylor was good for the ride home, so, Darcy thought, she would be good for making dinner. Turning her phone back on, she started the playlist again and played it through the hidden speakers in the cottage. After 20 minutes, Darcy sautéed the prosciutto and caramelized the onions to top the second-baked potatoes while enjoying a glass of Pinot. The potatoes were finishing their first stage of baking, and the steaks were coming to room temperature on her countertop. As Taylor reminded Darcy that bullets don't fix bullet wounds, and she finished packing the appetizer plate, the music volume suddenly dropped and was replaced by the front doorbell ringing through her entire speaker system. She was not used to doorbells ringing after 5 o'clock on a Sunday evening. Who the hell would come at a time like this? Darcy thought as she picked up her phone to check the security cameras. In her driveway was a white Tesla Model X parked behind her Jeep. Darcy didn't know anyone who drove a Model X. Swiping left to check the other cameras, she stopped when she reached the camera by the front door. She almost dropped the phone. Placing it on the countertop, she stared for a long time at the live feed from the camera on the front door. She took a long sip from her glass of wine and steeled herself. With a shaking finger, she pressed the talk button on the camera app. "What? For crap," Darcy said into the phone. "Hi, Darcy. Happy anniversary." Damon looked into the camera and brought a bouquet of flowers into view of the door camera. The 3 months between Darcy and Damon's undergraduate graduation and their move to Guelph were a whirlwind. Although Damon insisted on a speedy wedding and subsequent move to Canada as a married couple, Darcy was not going to give up on her dream of a fairy tale wedding and risk alienating her, to put it mildly, huge family in Maple Ferry and the Valley. Instead, the two of them found themselves on the highway in their beat-up old Subaru with a U-Haul trailer, driving the last 15 kilometers into Guelph after a marathon 13-hour drive from Maple Ferry. Luckily, crossing the border wasn't too much of a hassle for them. There was only a short line ahead, and the Canadian customs officers were incredibly kind and friendly due to their different visas. In total, they spent less than 10 minutes at the border. Darcy was convinced that if they were Canadians moving to the US, their experience would be completely different. Guelph in August can be unbearable, and the day they arrived was just that. The temperature was in the low 90s Fahrenheit, the humidity was in the high 80s, and it looked like a thunderstorm might start at any moment. Although the air conditioning in their car worked properly, the small rental home they signed up for had no cooling system that didn't involve rolling up the windows. So, after meeting the owner of the house, following him home, unloading the trailer and car, and returning the trailer, Damon and Darcy were left sweltering in the heat, without food, drinks, or air conditioning. Luckily, they spotted several large shopping complexes while returning the trailer. So they gathered up their courage and set out again for the city that was to become their home for the next 4 years. The next week went as one might expect for young students just arriving in a new city. While Damon was getting to know the campus and setting up his home office, Darcy was immersed in wedding preparations and job searches. Damon's loans paid for his studies, but in order for them to eat, stay warm and live, Darcy needed to work. On one of their first walks around campus, Darcy noticed a "opening soon" poster, the size of a king's bed sheet taped to a very fancy retail space. The images on the poster were glamour shots of coffee, mostly espresso, and people enjoying coffee. After writing down the coffee chain's name, Darcy found their phone number and email address and added them to her contact list. Later that week, Darcy called the headquarters of the coffee shop chain opening on campus and learned that they were indeed hiring and that they still had an opening for an assistant manager. Surprisingly, Darcy learned that as an assistant manager, she would receive a base salary, but would also have the opportunity to work overtime and holidays at double pay. In addition, the chain offered health and dental insurance and contributed to retirement savings for all employees. 2 days later, Darcy met with one of the chain's regional managers at another branch of the same coffee shop that was opening on campus. They hit it off, they had a lot in common, they both grew up in small towns and were both into fitness. Regional manager Claire praised Darcy's CV, her internships during her undergraduate studies, and her continued commitment during her studies, which made her stand out from others. But Darcy herself stood out. Claire was intrigued by Darcy's ideas on how to promote the cafe to a group of university students known throughout the country for their environmental and social awareness. Darcy thought about it for a long time and asked if the cafe chain offered sustainably grown coffees, produce, and other goods. Claire smiled. She realized that she and Darcy would work well together. Darcy returned home after the interview absolutely delighted with a job offer in hand. "Look, look, look, look," she screamed when she saw Damon preparing dinner in the kitchen. Darcy threw herself into Damon's arms, causing him to drop his knife to catch her, avoiding a trip to the hospital. She wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his shoulders, and hugged him tightly. "I got a job. I start my internship tomorrow. They will send me to Toronto for 2 weeks. I will be home on the weekends to work in one of their large branches and observe their best manager. I'll have a salary and insurance, and you'll have insurance too, and they'll contribute to our pension plan." Damon interrupted her with a kiss to slow down her words. "This is amazing, honey. Tell me everything, if you haven't told me yet." Damon said with a sly smile, "Damon, this is awesome. They primarily do espresso and baked goods, but also sell sandwiches and brewed coffee, tea, and more. They get all their food from local farms, and it's all fresh, so there's no nasty freezing, defrosting, and serving. Did you know they do this? Because I didn't know. They're an international network, so I can work for them when we get back to the States. Darcy continued talking, not noticing that Damon's face had become focused and distant. That's great, Darcy. Are you sure the job will cover all our expenses while we're here? Will you get what you want and what we need? Damon asked quietly. Well, basically, Darcy began, I'm hired as an assistant manager, which means I'll have a salary, but I'll still be able to work overtime and get double pay on holidays. So I think we'll be fine if I can get those extra hours. Are you sure we shouldn't continue our search, Darcy? If the salary is not enough to cover all our expenses, is this the right place for you? Damon continued with difficulty. He could see how excited Darcy was about the possibilities before her, and he felt selfish for asking her to consider other options. But he needed to make sure they could handle those 4 years in Guelph while he went to graduate school. That's when it all started for both of them. Distance, different interests, and areas of focus. Over the next weeks and months, Damon became angry at the amount of time Darcy spent working evenings, weekends, and all Canadian holidays. Darcy noticed how Damon was becoming irritable because of this, although he had previously been carefree. At first, Darcy chalked it up to stress from his new program and upcoming wedding. But there was something else going on. She just couldn't figure out what exactly it was. The following summer, Damon and Darcy were married in front of half the residents of Maple Ferry, as well as several of their college and Guelph friends at St. Mary's Church in Maple Ferry. The weather was perfect, Darcy looked dazzling, and her bridesmaids were lovely too. Damon's best man performed a surprise impromptu rap during the reception, which drew a storm of applause, and Mr. and Mrs. Monaghan Riley returned to Guelph happier than they had been the entire previous year. But within 3 weeks of returning from their honeymoon, their previous condition returned. Damon dove into his second-year program and began interning at the on-campus veterinary teaching hospital. Darcy was completely absorbed in preparing the new group of baristas for the arrival of the junior students. One positive outcome of all of Darcy's efforts was her promotion from assistant manager to cafe manager. Now she was responsible for all the work of the cafe. The transition from a performer to a leader role was challenging for Darcy, and she suffered from anxiety and self-sabotage. It wasn't until Thanksgiving, when she was still posting positive sales results and lower expenses, that Darcy began to feel more confident. She and Damon began cooking meals together on Sundays and freezing them in portions for the week ahead. Most weeks, Damon was out before 8 in the morning and back by 6 in the evening, while Darcy worked from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Monday to Wednesday and 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. By the end of the first full year of marriage, Damon was halfway through completing his veterinary medicine program and ranked among the top students in his course. Darcy also continued to exceed expectations at the cafe and enjoyed it. Over the next 2 years, they both continued to exceed the expectations of their managers, colleagues, and families. But they didn't handle it very well with each other. 2 months before Damon's program ended, Darcy walked into her regional manager's office to discuss her future with the company. Darcy, you have been amazing throughout your time with us. We've rarely been so impressed with a trainee manager and a cafe manager in such a short period, her manager began. I know Damon is graduating soon. Have you and he already thought about what will happen next? Darcy took a deep breath. She knew this conversation was inevitable. To be honest, Claire, we are planning on moving back to Maple Ferry. Damon has already made arrangements with the best veterinarian in town and will start work as soon as he can, and I was hoping to see if there was a place for me at one of the 4 cafes that are relatively close to the city or valley. Claire looked Darcy straight in the eyes. We could arrange this, Darcy, we could. But these cafes will not be a challenge for you. There are a dozen other places Ops would like to send you to restore order. Darcy felt her neck heat up and her face flush from the compliment. But what about a cafe closer to Maple Ferry? Darcy, I have great offers for you in Boston, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The team is ready to discuss an increase in your total compensation, including salary and options. You really impressed, girl, Claire continued. Claire, I just don't know how this will work. Damon and I were already planning a return to Maple Ferry. Darcy was devastated. Think about it, Darcy, think about it, Claire said. We still have time. Of course, Claire, I'll think about it. Darcy stood up, shook Claire's hand, and left the office to catch the bus back to campus. When she got home, she took off her shoes at the door and threw her bag on the sofa. She saw Damon opening something in the kitchen. Darling, Damon called. Are you home? Yes, dear, I just came in, Darcy replied, trudged from the living room to the kitchen. Walking into the kitchen, Damon handed the letter to Darcy for her to read. The University of Guelph Veterinary School is pleased to invite Mr. Damon Riley and his friends and family to attend Damon Riley's Doctor of Veterinary Medicine graduation ceremony on such and such a day. Oh dear, this is fantastic, Darcy screamed. She hugged Damon and held him tightly to her. We're almost there, honey. Pulling away from Damon, she looked at the letter again. Damon Riley, we added last names, dear, doesn't the school know? Damon glanced at the letter, then at the clock over the sink and out the window before meeting Darcy's eyes. It must be a mistake, honey. I'll sort this out with the registry tomorrow. They probably just didn't get the same information as everyone else, Damon suggested. Damon, I have several options for work in the States, Darcy began. This is amazing, honey. What will it be like to commute from Maple Ferry? Damon asked. Here's the thing. None of them are near Maple Ferry. The team is excited about what I've done in Guelph and thinks there's a lot more potential for me. They want to send me to some bigger but more complex cafes. They talk about San Francisco, Philadelphia, Boston, or Denver, Darcy continued. But honey, we're going back to Maple Ferry. I already promised Dr. Weiss. I can't let her down. Can't they get you closer? I thought you said there were about 4 cafes within an hour's drive, Damon continued. They say they can't. I don't know how much they want to keep me if all they offer are seats they want and not ones I can take, Darcy suggested, sounding dejected. Damon thought for a second. Maybe now is the time to defend yourself, honey. If they want to keep you that bad, they will find a way, even if they have to change something in these cafes closer to home. Yes, Darcy conceded. Perhaps. I'll find out tomorrow. I told Claire that we would discuss this, and I would get back to her with an answer. Let's go to that bakery that makes this amazing tomato soup and soda bread for dinner, Damon suggested. It'll cheer you up. There's nothing better than soul food, right? Is it true? Are you finally turning into a Canadian, Damon? Darcy smiled, putting her shoes back on, and they left the house together. Fuck you, Darcy said again through the camera. What are you doing here, Dr. Riley? Isn't it enough that I remember our shared anniversary and came to see you? Damon did his best to smile. But can we talk face to face instead of through this little device? He asked, tapping his fingernail on the camera. No, we can't. Good night, Damon, Darcy said, turning off the microphone and turning the music back on inside the cottage. He's really just apologizing for the show, isn't he, Taylor? Darcy said to the speakers, restarting Spotify and heading back to her kitchen. No one heard the Tesla pull out of the driveway and smoothly disappear into the distance. Damon and Darcy's return to Maple Ferry was something of a triumph for the town and valley families who loved them. They timed the annual summer reunion of the 4 families to coincide with the arrival of these 2, who had gone to Canada but returned as a doctor and a businesswoman. Of course, Darcy didn't have anything planned yet, but all her aunts and uncles were confident that she would soon get back on her feet. Meanwhile, Damon, now Dr. Riley, was already attracting attention and rescuing puppies at Dr. Weiss's clinic on Mill Street. It was said that Dr. Weiss had more clients now that she was able to extend her hours to 2:30 p.m., and on Saturdays, thanks to the new young veterinarian she brought in. Darcy was so lucky she found him, was a phrase often heard around the table of deviled eggs and iced tea during the weekend. During a mandatory softball game between the Monahan and Russo families, the town became even more enamored of the pair when Damon opened the match and Darcy closed it out, creating a pitching threat. After the reunion, this delight did not disappear. Maple Ferry approved of Darcy and Damon. Darcy's aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, and nephews, none of them were shy about talking about how wonderful Damon was and how great it would be to have a veterinarian as a husband. Darcy kept her head down and was losing her mind trying to find a job. She interviewed with 3 companies in the Maple Valley Commercial Park, but didn't find the energy or approach she was looking for. There are too many companies run by old, bored men. Darcy didn't just want to support the business, she wanted to grow it. She wanted to take something and make it better. A month has passed since she received the last letter from Claire, which said, "If you ever change your mind, Darcy, contact us. We will miss you. You know how to make our cafes sing. But not enough to put me in a cafe that I can run from Maple Ferry, right, Claire?" Darcy said to her computer. "To hell with this," and Darcy showed her monitor 2 middle fingers. Darcy's mood worsened with each passing day and week without meaningful work. Of course, Damon's new job more than covered the rent for their small townhouse, as well as their daily expenses. Hell, he even serviced his student loans on schedule. So there was no financial pressure on Darcy. The only pressure she felt was her own sense of loss and self-worth. Darcy was a doer, someone who needed to achieve. At that moment, at the age of 26, after 4 years of marriage and 9 years of partnership, 4 years of university honors, and another 4 years as a high-performance manager, Darcy had never felt more like a failure. Damon was on the opposite side of the sine wave. He was still winning. He was married to his high school sweetheart. He returned as a hero to his friends and family, and he made good money doing business, nay, following a calling he was passionate about. In the first months after returning to Maple Ferry from Guelph, Damon tried to establish a connection with Darcy, but could not figure out how to get her out of her state of dissatisfaction. At first, he tried to explain to Darcy that he didn't care that she didn't have a job. He still loves her and can provide for both of them. This proposal was received as a lead balloon. Damon then tried to take the conversation in a different direction, suggesting that maybe now was the time to think about starting a family and trying to have a child. For the first time in their almost 9 years together, he was afraid of Darcy's reaction to this proposal. As soon as the words, "trying for a baby," left his lips, he knew he had made a mistake. Darcy's face turned purple, as did her neck, as did her ears. Her eyes narrowed and her lips pursed, taking on an almost angry expression. "I'm not just a baby-making machine, Damon," Darcy screamed. "I am a smart, highly qualified, and successful businessman who can and will be successful professionally. Your success has nothing to do with my need, or lack thereof, to work. Your inability to understand this says more about you than it does about me." Darcy was furious, clenching her fists without noticing it. She literally stomped her right foot and stood nose to chest with Damon, looking into his eyes, glaring at him. Damon raised both hands in front of him, trying to make peace. "Calm down, darling, calm down," he began, but was quickly interrupted by Darcy. "Calm down? What am I, a damn animal?" she screamed. Not wanting to continue this conversation, Darcy leaned across the kitchen table and grabbed the car keys from the fruit bowl. "I'm going for a ride," she announced and left. Darcy didn't drive far. She knew she was too angry to sit behind the wheel for long. Instead, she drove to the town square and parked, crossing Main Street into the small promenade of shops and services located between the street and the river. Most of these places were already closed, but the embankment was still bustling with people walking along the river and looking for something to do after dinner. It wasn't until she turned the corner to go outside and find her car that Darcy realized why she had come downtown in her anger. There, on the corner of Main and Mill Streets, stood a large old restaurant that was once home to Burger Den, an independent Maple Ferry eatery. But the Burger Den had been closed for 3 years, with rumors swirling that the property was in dispute as part of a disputed inheritance. Well, it looked like the argument was over because, just like before, there was a sign right on the big front window that said, "The Sugar Shack, great coffee, best pastries, passable service opening soon." So, a week after she rushed out the door, Darcy got her answer. She became the new manager of the Sugar Shack and was completely engrossed in recruiting the first baristas and bakers to ever set foot in the place. After another 2 weeks, Damon and Darcy had returned to the same habits they had in Guelph, acting more like roommates than husband and wife. Damon worked Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Darcy worked Sunday through Thursday from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., plus hours which she spent on planning and paperwork at home. They tried, but they both spent more time on their work than on each other. Their schedules meant that they mostly ate lunch alone and spent their free time with friends. In the rare moments when they were both at home and not working, they would lie on the couch together, watch movies, and relax. Of course, they went to family events and celebrated seasonal holidays together. They tried to pay attention to each other, but they were both too busy and focused on their work. After witnessing Darcy's prowess in action, the Sugar Shack's owners smartly stepped back from day-to-day management after realizing how good Darcy was at her job. Not only did she build a team that could make great coffee and great food, but she also excelled at making customers feel special. The Sugar Shack was quickly becoming the place to be in Maple Ferry. Damon continued to develop a relationship with Dr. Weiss. She was in her 40s and had taken over the veterinary practice from her uncle, the previous Dr. Weiss, 15 years earlier. Divorced with an adult child, it was an unspoken truth that she wanted to sell the clinic to Dr. Riley when she felt he was competent enough to run it, and when he had accumulated enough capital to finance the purchase of the clinic. Dr. Weiss twice tried to get Darcy to manage the practice. Dr. Weiss recognized Darcy's natural management skills. But Darcy had no interest in running a veterinary clinic. She didn't have the same passion for animals as she did for customer service. One day, almost a year after they returned to Maple Ferry from Guelph, Darcy received a call at work. She usually didn't answer calls from unknown numbers, especially when she was at the Sugar Shack. But this time she answered. "Hello, Darcy Monahan Riley," she answered affably. "Miss Monahan," began the male voice on the other end of the line. "Monahan Riley, thank you," Darcy said again with a little more emphasis on the hyphen. "Yes, right. Miss Monahan Riley, this is Bill Ross from Valley Partners," the voice tried again. Valley Partners, Darcy knew, was one of 3 law firms serving Maple Ferry and the Valley. Bill Ross, another scion of the Russo clan, was several years older than her and had been practicing there since graduating from law school. "Bill Ross, since when do you address me as Miss Monahan Riley?" Darcy asked. "We've known each other since Sunday school." "Sorry, Darcy, it's just that given the news I have to tell you, I thought a formality was important," Bill continued. "Darcy, I'm sorry to tell you, but your grandfather Monahan died today." Darcy gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "It happened suddenly and painlessly, at least that's what the doctors told us," Bill continued. "Your mom and dad thought you'd want to know first, considering how much you loved the old man." Darcy sank to the floor in the utility room, still unable to answer. "Darcy, are you there?" asked Bill. "Yes, Bill. I'm here." "How?" she asked. "Your parents should tell you this, Darcy. I'm really sorry," Bill offered. "Thank you, Bill. Are my parents at home?" "They're in the big house," Bill suggested. The great house was the home where the eldest descendants of the Monahan family lived and where the family held all annual holiday events, parties, and special celebrations. This was the home of the Monahan grandparents before Darcy was born. Darcy came to the front to talk to the crew that was closing the Sugar Shack that evening to let them know she needed to leave early. They were fine and she knew it, but she always told her team to announce to those working when they were coming in or leaving for a shift, so she did the same. Walking out the back door of the cafe into the parking lot, Darcy paused to wait until she heard the lock on the safety bar click into place. Making sure the back door was locked, she jumped into her old Mazda 3 and headed to Dr. Weiss's practice, knowing that Damon would close the clinic soon and that he would want to come with her. Damon and Grandpa have always been on good terms. As she pulled into the small parking lot behind Dr. Weiss's clinic, Darcy was surprised to see Damon's car parked next to Dr. Weiss's. Today must have been a late surgery, which was bad because it meant Damon would be delayed and Darcy really wanted to come to the big house. Entering the clinic through the back door marked "Employees Only," Darcy was struck by how quiet the place was. There were no cats meowing or dogs barking, just the faint smell of disinfectant and the clatter, clatter, clatter of the clinic's washing machine running. Damon had once told Darcy how many loads of towels and blankets the clinic washed every week, and she had been amazed. Heading to the clinic's reception area, Darcy looked into the open doors of the offices along the way, but did not see any clients there. Where did everyone go? Continuing along the central corridor towards the reception, the next along the path was the staff office, combined with a laundry room. She was only a few steps away from the doorway when she heard it. Now moving as quietly as possible, Darcy tiptoed to the open doorway and cautiously peered around the corner. Looking into the room, she had to suppress a cry. Here they are. They had sex. They had no idea Darcy was here. Quietly moving from shock to loss to anger, Darcy realized to take out her phone and start recording the video. The clinic door was unlocked. The date and time were within normal clinic hours, and they had no reasonable expectation of privacy in the room with the door open. Darcy remained there for what seemed like an eternity, but she stopped recording and quietly left the room and building. By the time the doctor had cleaned themselves up and left the staff room, Darcy was already on her way to the big house. The bottle of Pinot Noir had done its job, enough to cook dinner, enough for dinner itself, and only a few drops left in the bottle when Darcy was ready to move from food coma to bath coma. Leaving behind the quiet whir of her dishwasher, Darcy headed to the bedroom, where she took off her clothes and put on her satin robe, which she saved for special occasions when she wanted to feel special. The dress barely reached mid-thigh, and the sleeves were elbow-length, covering just enough to not be overtly provocative, but still leaving enough to the imagination. Darcy loved the way the smooth satin fabric glides across her skin. Darcy walked down the hall to the bathroom. There she was greeted by a warm floor, thanks to the built-in heating. Heading over to the deep clawfoot tub, she ran the hot water for a few minutes, added her favorite essential oils, and lit the beeswax candles on the vanity. She took her phone out of her robe pocket, opened the music app, and selected a playlist with atmospheric sounds of rain in various landscapes, turning it on at low volume. Music played softly from the ceiling speakers. When the water was full and the bath was ready, Darcy stepped into the nearly boiling water and sank into it, feeling all her muscles relax. She allowed herself to rest a little, immersing herself in memories of how surprised Damon had been when he was handed the divorce papers. The first 48 hours after the shocking discovery at Dr. Weiss's veterinary clinic and the news of the death of her grandfather Monahan passed in a kind of fog, Darcy suddenly began to feel depressed, and this was new to her. Luckily, she didn't see much of Damon during this time. Yes, when Damon returned home from the clinic that evening, Darcy told him about his grandfather's death, and yes, they comforted each other over the loss. They both loved him. But that same night, Darcy went to stay with her parents, ostensibly to be there during this moment of grief, and stayed there for 4 nights. Finally, on the 5th day after she walked in on Damon and Dr. Weiss, Darcy was supposed to go back to Damon's house, but she couldn't handle the stress and ended up stopping the car on the side of the road, somewhere halfway between the big house and the house that she shared with Damon. She sat in the car and sobbed. Heavy rain drummed on the roof of her small Mazda, and Darcy did not immediately notice how a car pulled up behind her. The car's headlights were turned on, and were directed in her direction, but soon went out. Someone got out of the car and knocked on her passenger side window. Looking to her right, Darcy saw Evelyn, one of her regular customers at the sugar shack. "Darcy, can I come in? It's pouring like buckets here," Evelyn shouted through the closed window. Darcy unlocked the doors and Evelyn slid into the passenger seat, careful not to get the inside of the car wet. Almost mechanically, still sobbing, Darcy reached into the back seat and pulled fresh, dry towels from her duffel bag, handing one to Evelyn. Evelyn was relatively new to the city and valley, but Darcy grew to love her. Evelyn worked at a business in the Valley Commercial Park, so Darcy didn't see her often, but they became gym buddies, in addition to Evelyn being a regular at the cafe. "What's wrong, honey?" Evelyn asked, wiping her face with one end of the towel, then folded it and handed it to Darcy. "You're so wet, but you look like you're making your own rain." Darcy took the towel and buried her face in it, her shoulders shaking with deep sobs. After a few minutes, her shoulders sagged and she took a deep breath. Lifting her head and letting the towel fall into her lap, Darcy placed both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. "I don't know what to do," Darcy said. "For the first time in my life, I don't know what to do. I didn't plan this. I didn't expect this. I just don't know what to do," she repeated again, and tears began to form in her eyes again. Her lower lip began to tremble, and she returned to sobbing. Evelyn reached for Darcy and, at the same time, unwrapped her towel, unbuckled her seat belt, and pulled her into an awkward half-sitting hug, placing her head on her shoulder. Leaning over, Evelyn rested her cheek against the top of Darcy's head, allowing the young woman to cry a little more before she said, "Okay, honey, it looks like you need a listener, and I'm willing to listen. But if we do it, we'll do it at my house. The rain has eased a little, so why don't you turn off the car and come to my place?" Darcy just nodded limply and did as Evelyn suggested. She turned off the engine, handed the keys to Evelyn, got out of the blue Mazda, and got into the passenger seat of Evelyn's car. Evelyn took Darcy's purse, phone, and duffel bag, then locked her car and returned to hers through the drizzling rain. Placing Darcy's things in the back seat, she buckled them both in and turned on the heated seats. After making sure that everything was comfortably arranged, Evelyn picked up the phone and made a call. "Evelyn, I hope the night shift workers didn't trigger another alarm. I don't want to go back to reset the system tonight," said the man who answered the call. "Eric, is this the right way to answer a call from a beautiful woman who also happens to be your boss?" Evelyn teased. "Damn it, are you a woman? I never got any further than my boss." Eric answered with a smile. "What happened, Evelyn? Everything is fine. Actually, I need your help, but it's quick and easy, and I'll compensate you." Evelyn answered. "Oh, okay," Eric said, now more relaxed. "How can I help? And what will I get for this? Grab Donnie and come see me in 10 minutes. I need you to pick up the car and bring it to me. The whole job will take 20 minutes, and I have a bottle of that cool microbrew from Riverhead Brewery for each of you." Evelyn suggested. "Maid, see you in 10 minutes," Eric answered. Evelyn drove the 5 minutes to her house and settled Darcy on one end of the sofa, wrapped in a blanket to keep warm while she put the kettle on. Eric drove in and soon left, delivering Darcy's car and picking up his beer bottles. By the time all this was done, Darcy had already begun to calm down and gratefully accepted the cup of herbal tea that Evelyn handed her. "Start where you want, dear," Evelyn said. "You seem to have a lot on your mind. Why don't you share this with me?" And Darcy began to tell, slowly but steadily. She shared everything difficult, terrible, exciting, and upsetting that she had learned over the past 5 days, starting with the discovery of Damon's infidelity with Dr. Weiss. After she explained how she caught Damon and Dr. Weiss in the act, Darcy moved on to the news of her grandfather's death and the shock and sadness of losing someone dear to her. This sense of loss, double loss, really lay at the heart of the Darcy. In Damon's case, this sadness was mixed with intense anger and a sense of betrayal. In her grandfather's case, her sadness was accompanied by feelings of gratitude and surprise, since Darcy was the recipient of significant assistance as an heir. Darcy was shocked to learn at the reading of Monahan's grandfather's will that she would become the owner of Valley School Cottage and receive $250,000. However, this money came with conditions, but these conditions did not limit Darcy. Valley School Cottage remained an asset of the Monahan Family Trust, but was leased to Darcy for 100 years for a nominal fee of $1. The house remained Darcy's property until she broke the terms of the contract or decided to return the cottage to the trust for a fee of $1. As for the $250,000, it was provided to Darcy as an interest-free loan from the Monahan Family Trust, which was to be repaid in full within 25 years and which could only be used to purchase real estate, shares of local companies, or as seed capital for a new business in Maple Ferry or Valley. Darcy was not surprised at how prudent Grandfather Monahan had been in formulating the terms of his will, not just for her, but for everyone in the Monahan family. Darcy didn't yet know what she wanted to spend $250,000 on, but she was thrilled to be moving into the Valley School Cottage. The only thing she was absolutely sure of was that she was not going to stay with Damon. Their relationship is over. Damon and Darcy were dead. Evelyn interrupted Darcy's story at this point. "Darcy, are you sure you want to divorce Damon? I understand that he was unfaithful and it hurt you, but you've been together for so long." Darcy thought about Evelyn's question, bit her lower lip, leaned forward, and covered her face with her hands. "You know, Evelyn, the more I think about it, the more confident I am. Our relationship has long been at an impasse. We haven't worked as a unit for several years now. We haven't worked on anything together since we decided to go to Guelph. When we arrived there, it was as if the small boat of our partnership was split into two parts, and each boat went along its own stream. We could still see the other boat and shout to each other, but we were no longer going to the same place." Evelyn sighed when she heard this. "What do you want to get out of this divorce? You supported both of you financially throughout his studies. What would a successful settlement look like for you?" asked Evelyn. "I just want to leave with a clean break. We'll split our shared checking account in half. We don't have a savings account. We have no debt other than his student loans, which are all in his name. We have no assets to speak of. Our cars are in our names, and each of us must keep our car and continue to pay our loan obligations." Darcy shared. "What about your inheritance, Darcy? Wouldn't Damon want his share?" asked Evelyn. Darcy's eyes narrowed, and she calmly but coldly replied, "He won't be able to touch him. Hell, even I can barely reach it. I will use it, of course, but the property will remain in the family, and the loan will not be provided until I fulfill its terms." "What's your plan, Darcy?" Evelyn took a sip of her now cold tea and wished she had gotten one of her bottles of bourbon. Darcy looked Evelyn straight in the eye and said, "I need to talk to the family lawyer and my parents first, but I'm inclined to tell Damon everything right now. He also mourns Grandpa Monahan. He loved the man and respected my parents. I think if Damon really thinks about it, he'll realize that the simplest and best thing he can do is break up cleanly and quickly." As if reading Evelyn's thoughts, Darcy looked into her cup and asked, "Do you have anything stronger? This conversation calls for something more invigorating." Now that she'd shared her story, Darcy didn't hesitate, and Evelyn believed her when she said Damon would likely want a quick and clean breakup, too. Damon and Darcy have been together for about 10 years, and with that time comes understanding the other person. That evening, Darcy pulled into the driveway of the townhouse she and Damon had rented. His car was already in front of the garage, and she parked next to it. Opening the front door, Darcy felt the warmth of the house, and the smell of Damon's famous pasta sauce hit her face. She walked into the house and took off her shoes at the door, looking at the things that represented her life together with Damon. Damon called from the kitchen, "Darcy, are you home?" The music and sounds from the kitchen sounded joyful. She must have looked upset when she walked into the kitchen and turned off the small radio that was playing from under the cabinet. Darcy saw the worry on Damon's face as he dropped the wooden spoon into the sauce that was simmering on the stove. Crossing the kitchen in 2 strides, Damon reached out to hug Darcy and almost reached her before she raised both hands in front of her and gently pushed him away. "Honey, what happened?" Damon asked. "How long?" Darcy replied. "How long for what, Darcy?" "You know what I'm asking. Be honest in your answer. How long?" "Honey, I don't understand." "I don't know what you're talking about," Damon said, turning to look at the sauce simmering on the stove. "I'll ask for the last time. Think about it, Damon. What can I ask? How long?" Damon crossed his arms and looked at Darcy, narrowing his eyes a little as if he was trying to figure out what she was actually asking. "I'm not playing a guessing game with you, Darcy. I see that you are upset and I want to help. But I'm not playing," Damon said, turning to the stove to stir the sauce. "Are you not playing? It's almost funny." "Well then, let me press play," Darcy said loudly and confidently, taking her phone out of her pocket, clicking on the video recorded in Dr. Weiss's office and turning the volume up to maximum. Damon froze and turned around. He looked at the video playing on the phone Darcy was holding with her arms outstretched. "Where did you get this?" Damon asked. "Where did I get this? Is that all you can say? How about, it's not what it seems, or it was just one time, or it's just sex, or I love you and I'm sorry. How about all of this, Damon?" Darcy was almost screaming. "Where did you get this?" Damon repeated. "I took it off. I made this video the day Grandpa Monahan died. I left work early to tell you about his death. I thought you'd want to know, and I knew you were still at the clinic. You always work on Saturdays. Now I understand why," Darcy snapped. Damon visibly winced and leaned against the kitchen counter, moving the saucepan to the cool burner. "About 6 weeks," he said quietly. Darcy turned off the video, turned around, and headed into their bedroom. She pulled out a small suitcase from the bottom of the closet and began packing fresh clothes into it. "What are you doing?" Damon asked, following her out of the kitchen. "You're a smart man, Dr. Riley. Answer this question yourself," Darcy said, without raising her head from her suitcase. "But where are you going?" Damon insisted. "I'm going to stay with my parents. They will soon move to the big house, but for now I will stay with them. Today I will spend the night with them, and tomorrow I will move to the big house. I'll be back later in the week to pick up the rest of my things." Darcy spoke calmly, but there was a steely determination in her voice. Damon leaned on the doorframe, stunned. "But, what? Is it that simple? Are you just leaving?" "I'm definitely not staying here with you, Dr. Riley," Darcy shouted. "What did you expect? What were your plans when I found out?" Damon looked down at the floor and muttered under his breath, "I don't know. I didn't think about it that far ahead. I thought you wouldn't find out. Barbara and I were going to stop this as soon as she left the business." "Oh, how convenient for you and Dr. Weiss. You were going to cheat until she decided to leave, and then our marriage would be good enough for you. How many years did this have to go on, Dr. Riley? You can't buy out her share now. How many years were you planning on having the two of us before you came back to me again? Perhaps by then we would have had children, and you would have sought solace elsewhere." Darcy clapped her hands sarcastically. "I thought you wouldn't find out. But I also didn't know how you would react if you found out." Damon began to feel nauseous, his face turning pale and sweat beading on his forehead. "Did you really think that I didn't value myself enough to forgive such betrayal as in that video?" Darcy was furious. She grabbed her suitcase and headed towards the bathroom. "Dr. Riley, if you truly understand what's going on in our relationship, how do you see us getting through this?" Darcy spoke calmly again, but her voice was cold and uncompromising. "I mean, we could go to a counselor. We could reconsider our work schedule and make time for the two of us. If we want, we can fix it," Damon tried to explain. "I don't want to fix it, Dr. Riley. I see you, and I see what's happening in this video. I hear you, but all I hear is 6 weeks. This has been going on for 6 weeks now. You made a decision when you decided to change. Today I will be with Mom and Dad. Tomorrow I will go to the clinic and get tested because I did not know that I have been intimate with 2 veterinarians for the past 6 weeks. After that, I'll go to Valley Partners. Whatever you want to tell me, you can convey through them. Tomorrow they will contact you to tell you who my lawyer is." Darcy glared at Damon, not giving him a chance to object. Damon sank to the floor and Darcy stepped over his lap and headed into the bedroom to get her suitcase. "Goodbye, Dr. Riley. I'll let you know 24 hours before I come back for the rest of my things," she said, wheeling her suitcase down the hallway toward the exit. Darcy emerged from the bathtub cushions, her nose pushing through the bubbles. She tilted her head back to keep her hair out of the way and relaxed against the soft pillow hanging on the edge of the bathtub. Being only 5 feet tall, she enjoyed the fact that every bath felt like a spa treatment. Her feet never touched the other end of the bath. As she contemplated her breakup with Damon, she remembered plunging into a near-boiling bathtub and how that moment marked the beginning of the end of their marriage and whatever relationship remained between them. Darcy kept her word. She was examined and sought legal help. Valley Partners assigned its best divorce lawyer to Darcy's case, but he wasn't really needed. Darcy's parents were devastated. They adored Damon, but most of all they loved their daughter and understood that she did not want to be talked out of divorce. Unlike many parents, they did not try to do this even once, not with a single word, but only consoled Darcy and helped her focus on what lay ahead. 2 days after she left the townhouse she shared with Damon, he was given paperwork at the veterinary clinic while he and Dr. Weiss were seeing clients. Around 10:30 a.m., a young woman with a Pomeranian in her arms entered the clinic and walked up to the front desk. Dr. Weiss, who was seeing off a previous client, greeted her. "Hello, welcome to my clinic. I'm Dr. Weiss. Who are we seeing?" "This is Shark," said the young woman, pointing to the orange. "I actually came to see Dr. Riley. Is he here?" "Yes, he's here, although," and Dr. Weiss glanced at the computer in front of her, "we don't have an appointment with Shark today." "Oh, it's okay. We won't stay long. I just want to tell Dr. Riley something," the girl said. "I'm a little embarrassed." At that moment, Damon entered the reception area from the corridor leading to the offices. Without hesitation, the processor recognized him by his name badge and said, "Dr. Riley?" Damon looked at the cute dog and the almost cute young woman and said, "Yes, that's me. How can I help?" "You have been served with a subpoena," she said, taking a legal envelope from under her dog and handing it to Damon before turning around and leaving the clinic. With shaking hands, Damon tore open the top of the envelope and pulled out a thin folder. "What the hell is this?" Dr. Weiss asked sharply. "This is from Darcy," he said. "She filed for divorce. She doesn't mention infidelity. She states irreconcilable differences." There was no one in the reception area or the waiting area, but Dr. Weiss, being no fool, grabbed Damon by the elbow and led him down the hallway to the staff room, seating him at the dining table. "Damon, may I assume you mean Darcy knows about us?" asked Dr. Weiss. "Yes. She ran into me 2 days ago. She moved in with her parents. She said we were done. I just didn't believe her." Damon began to feel the world slipping away from under his feet, his face losing color and sweat forming on his forehead. "Damon, if you want this practice to continue to be the most successful veterinary practice in Maple Ferry and the Valley, and for you to be able to run it until retirement or sell it, you must never allow it to be known that you cheated on Darcy Monahan," Dr. Weiss said in a serious tone. "What?" Damon asked in disbelief, only now realizing what Dr. Weiss was trying to convey. "Damon, you yourself are well aware that Darcy and her family are some kind of local nobility. They are related to 70% of our clients and know the remaining 30%. Can you imagine what would happen to our business if it became known that our affair ruined your marriage?" Dr. Weiss continued. "Do you know what an outcast is? We would close the clinic and move at least 100 miles to start over," she added, looking intently at Damon. Damon took a deep breath and looked at the documents again. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a pen. "What are you doing?" Dr. Weiss almost screamed. "I'm going to sign these papers," Damon replied as he began filling out the forms. "Don't sign anything without a lawyer, Damon. Don't be a fool," Dr. Weiss said sharply. She reached for a pad of sticky notes, wrote a local phone number on the top paper, and stuck it on Damon's robe. "This is Barney's number. He's the best divorce lawyer in the valley, not affiliated with the Monahan family," Dr. Weiss offered, looking at the divorce papers that Damon could barely stomach. Damon and Darcy both benefited from lawyers. Darcy got what she wanted, a clean breakup, and Damon got Darcy to agree to some counseling before the final divorce. Both signed non-disclosure agreements, as did Dr. Weiss, Darcy's parents, and her friend Evelyn, ensuring that information about the infidelity would remain confidential. And now, just 6 weeks after Darcy caught Damon and Dr. Weiss in the act, their marriage was officially over. Not only that, but on the same day, exactly a year after the final divorce, Darcy became the owner of the Sugar Shack Cafe. It was already well after midnight. The candles in Darcy's bathroom were burning out, and her fingers were wrinkled from being in the water for so long. Darcy stepped out of the bath and dried herself roughly with a towel. She threw off her robe and headed down the hallway to her bedroom, where she tossed the robe on her reading chair. Darcy enjoyed the feeling of being naked and alone, reaching up with both hands towards the ceiling before throwing back the blanket and bedding and jumping into her bed full of pillows. Knowing that sleep was just around the corner, Darcy congratulated herself on one of the most satisfying days of her divorce anniversary. And then, when she was about to put the phone on charge, she saw a message notification, followed by another one. The messages were from Chelsea, one of her employees at the Sugar Shack Cafe. This did not bode well. Darcy quickly unlocked her phone and saw something that shocked her. "Damn men," Darcy shouted into the emptiness of her home while scrolling through her contact list to call Lyric, another employee who was helping close the cafe that evening. Across town, Damon Riley celebrated his divorce anniversary with his 5th Guinness in the bar he built in his outdoor kitchen. Looking at the bouquet of flowers he placed in a vase on the edge of the bar, he said with a smile, "She named me Damon." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.